Debbie Harry was born Angela Trimble on July 1st, 1945 in Miami, Florida. But almost immediately after her birth, her biological mother gave her up for adoption, leaving behind only a mysterious legacy, a deep love for music and the stage. For a while, young Debbie liked to imagine that Marilyn Monroe was her real mother, a fantasy that perfectly fit her fascination with glamour and fame. But years later, she discovered the truth. Her biological mother had simply been a concert pianist, not a Hollywood icon. The newborn spent just a few months in an orphanage before being adopted by Richard and Catherine Harry, a couple from Hawthorne, New Jersey, who renamed her Deborah Ann Harry. Although the future star found a loving home, her early years were not easy. She often felt like an outsider, quiet, dreamy, and lost in her own world. Most of her time was spent alone, wandering through nearby woods, reading, or listening to the radio. Her adoptive parents noticed her natural charisma, beauty, and an instinctive pull toward music. But they also saw how her shyness might hold her back. So they enrolled her in the church choir, hoping it would help her open up. There, Debbie began to develop her singing voice, shed her timidity, and learn how to connect with people. More importantly, she discovered the power of her voice, how it could move others when combined with her confidence and charm. That realization served her well in high school. Though she remained observant and somewhat reserved, Debbie had a keen understanding of how to use her beauty and magnetic presence to her advantage. By the time she graduated in 1963, she had even been voted the most beautiful girl in her class. Surprisingly, music wasn't yet part of her plans. During and after high school, Debbie didn't dream of being a singer. Deep down, she just wanted to escape suburbia, to live differently from everyone around her, even if she didn't yet know what that meant. Hoping to find her path, she enrolled at Centenary College in Hackettstown, New Jersey, mostly as a way to gain independence from her adoptive family and move toward the adventure-filled life she had always imagined. In the mid-1960s, Debbie moved to New York, a city that was absolutely buzzing with life. The Vietnam War, the hippie movement, underground art, protests, and endless energy. It was the start of her years of self-discovery. At first, Harry took a job as a secretary at the radio office. To her, radio felt like a world made entirely of sound, and with her strong, expressive voice, she wanted to be close to that world, to understand how radio shows were made, how music was chosen. It was her first real touch of show business, and it sparked her early thoughts about becoming a singer. But office life quickly grew dull. Debbie realized that sitting behind a desk would never help her make a name for herself, so she moved on. Her next stop was the legendary Max's Kansas City, where she worked as a waitress. The club was the heart of New York's art scene. It was the other side of the stage, raw and electric. At Max's, Debbie learned how to survive among artists, eccentrics, and geniuses. She watched how people built their image, how style could become power, and in a place like that, her beauty and charm didn't go unnoticed. Someone spotted her and offered her a job as a burlesque dancer. She performed in clubs around the Lower East Side, doing light striptease acts and old-school vaudeville routines. It wasn't the job of her dreams, but it gave her a stage, an audience, and experience. Through new connections, Debbie eventually landed an audition for the band The Wind in the Willows, which was looking for a female vocalist. The group was very much a product of its time. Psychedelic folk with touches of Baroque pop, filled with gentle guitars, flutes, organ sounds, and naive lyrics about love and nature. Debbie wasn't yet the ice blonde icon she'd later become. Her voice back then was soft, hazy, almost mystical. In 1968, The Wind in the Willows recorded a self-titled album produced by Art Polemos. The cover featured all the band members, including a young Debbie with long, dark blonde hair, still years away from her signature look. The album flopped commercially, but it left a mark. It was her first official release and her first experience in a recording studio. An experience that wouldn't go unnoticed for long. For a few years, Debbie scraped by with odd jobs again, until 1973, when her beauty and charisma finally opened the next door. She was invited to join a band called The Stilettos, born from the gritty, sexual, and ironic underground wave that was taking over New York in the early 70s. The Stilettos were less of a band and more of a musical cabaret, a mix of pop, burlesque, and rock and roll satire. On stage, the girls wore provocative outfits, danced, joked with the audience, and slipped between numbers filled with wild energy. It was in this group that Debbie met guitarist Chris Stein, a connection that would change both of their lives. musically and romantically. Stein quickly noticed what others couldn't ignore. Debbie wasn't just a good singer, she was the center of gravity anywhere she appeared. In a 2005 interview, Chris recalled, "Debbie had something no image maker could invent, a mix of vulnerability and power. It was terrifying and magnetic at the same time." The Stilettos didn't last long. Personality clashes, poor organization, and competing ambitions tore the group apart. But Harry and Stein stayed together, both as a couple and as creative partners. They decided to start fresh with a simpler, rawer sound. In 1974, from the ashes of the Stilettos, they formed a new project called Angel and the Snake, which soon evolved into Blondie. The name came naturally, almost accidentally. Truck drivers would call out to Debbie on the street, "Hey, Blondie!" and the phrase stuck. It became the start of a whole new chapter in her life. Blondie quickly took over the stages of Max's Kansas City and CBGB, standing out from the rest of the New York scene. While bands like the Ramones, Television, and Talking Heads leaned into raw punk or art rock, Blondie played punk dressed up in pop, blending irony with glamour. Critics at first dismissed this mix as confusion, but that contrast became their defining signature, and crucially, Debbie wasn't pretending to be a punk girl. She was 29, not a naive rebel. She had lived the kind of life younger musicians only sang about. After a few years of relentless performing, Blondie signed with the independent label Private Stock Records in 1976 and released their debut album, Blondie. Debbie later described it as girl group songs with a bite, and that's exactly what it was, a venomous parody of American pop culture. Songs like Ex-Offender and Rip Her to Shreds cleverly mocked the media's portrayal of female sexuality. Although the album flopped in the US, it found a small following in Australia and the UK, especially thanks to In the Flesh. Commercially, it was a failure, but it raised Blondie's visibility enough to land them a deal with a bigger label, Chrysalis Records. At that point, the creative partnership between Stein and Harry shifted focus. Less punk chaos, more pop precision. They both understood that without real commercial success, their artistic freedom wouldn't last. They viewed their first album as a reaction to the world around them, but the second one would be their true reflection. It would capture what people saw when they came to CBGB or Max's Kansas City, cool, dangerous, and irresistibly modern. In 1978, they released Plastic Letters. Stein took full control of the music, while Debbie shaped everything else. From the metaphorical title, echoing the artificial spirit of 1970s New York, to the lyrical mood of the songs. The standout was, of course, Debbie's voice, light, ironic, and somehow vulnerable. Tracks like Dennis and I'm Always Touched by Your Presence, Dear had a cinematic feel, as if she were turning her own life into scenes from a movie. The story of a city nymph, tired but sharp-tongued, lost yet in control. That album marked a turning point. It was the moment Debbie Harry stopped being just a girl with a microphone and became a woman who could command the room, shaping the entire mood around her, blending pop sparkle with the cold grit of the streets. Even though the album once again went largely unnoticed in the US, in the UK, the single Denise easily stormed the charts, climbing to number 2 and instantly making Debbie Harry a British television sensation. But that wasn't enough, not for Blondie, and certainly not for their producers. By then, Stein and Harry had already figured out their formula for success. Their inner punk just needed a good dry clean. So, in barely 6 months, they created Parallel Lines, the album that turned Blondie into a cultural phenomenon. Debbie became a worldwide icon, the ultimate symbol of New York, where punk collided with disco. The single Heart of Glass shot them straight to the top of the charts, but also sparked backlash. Punk fans accused the band of selling out. Debbie, however, found the outrage amusing. She often said she never wanted to be a thing that belonged to one subculture. She wanted to be everything at once, like a punk, a pop diva, a film heroine. That attitude ran through every second of Parallel Lines. Debbie didn't just sing, or she conducted emotion. In Hanging on the Telephone, she sounds like she's barely suppressing a breakdown. In One Way or Another, she becomes a playful stalker, grinning through the obsession. And in Heart of Glass, she morphs into an android disco queen, singing about love with zero emotion. Her voice was both human and artificial, and that duality became the essence of the record, a reflection of a world already living between reality and media fantasy. But with huge fame came huge exhaustion. And for Harry, it was overwhelming. Within a single year, she'd produced 2 full albums, performed endless shows, and endured constant press scrutiny. Producers demanded another hit, another tour, another miracle. Summoning every ounce of strength, Debbie delivered again, releasing Eat to the Beat later that same year. It was a special album, not only musically but visually. Harry became deeply involved in the direction of the videos, the concepts, and even the early formation of the MTV aesthetic. Years before MTV officially existed, you could already hear a trace of fatigue in her voice, though. At that point, Chris Stein became her anchor, a stabilizing force who supported her through the chaos, even as both of them worked at an impossible pace. After a short break in 1980, Blondie released Auto-American, a truly pivotal record. Debbie decided to break their own formula, to surprise everyone and shatter expectations. While fans anticipated another dance floor hit, she fused reggae, hip-hop, and orchestral pop into something entirely new. The most surprising tracks were The Tide is High, a soft, confident reggae groove, and Rapture, the first chart-topping song where a white singer performed rap, complete with nods to hip-hop and street fashion. It was a bold risk, and it worked. Both songs hit #1. Yet the exhaustion that had crept in during Eat to the Beat never really left. Harry was shining brighter than ever, but the pressure was crushing. Everyone wanted the icon, not the person behind it. She confided to friends that she felt like a thing made for the camera. In many ways, Auto-American was deeply personal for Debbie Harry, a reminder to herself that Blondie could be anything, even if nobody else liked it. And while the album kept their success alive, the universe seemed to sense her fatigue, and soon it would test her in ways she never expected. First, Blondie fell apart, or at least that's how it looked from the outside. In truth, the band was being torn apart from within, by exhaustion, commercial pressure, and by Chris Stein's sudden illness. He had developed a rare autoimmune disease called pemphigus, which literally caused his skin to blister and erode. At the height of fame, Debbie walked away from everything to take care of him. She stopped touring, disappeared from the media, and almost vanished from music entirely. While everyone waited for the next album, she was at home in their Manhattan apartment, cooking soup, changing bandages, and fighting the constant fear that he might die. Those years became her period of quiet isolation. She tried to begin a solo career, releasing Cuckoo in 1981, produced by Nile Rodgers and Bernard Edwards of Chic. The album was an experiment, a mix of funk rhythms and futuristic pop, with a striking cover by surrealist artist Hans Rudi Giger showing Debbie's face pierced by metallic spikes. The press didn't get it. It was too weird, too far from Blondie's sound, but beneath the surface, it was her first real attempt to break free from the image of the blonde on stage and establish herself as an independent artist. After the album's commercial failure, she simply stepped back. By 1983, her life had almost entirely dissolved into caring for Chris. She turned down film roles, rarely appeared in public, and later admitted, "Those were the years when I stopped being Debbie Harry. I was just someone who loved." By the mid-80s, it was as if Debbie finally woke from a coma. Not a physical one, but a creative one. Chris recovered from his illness. Blondie was long behind her, and she found herself in a new musical world. One ruled by synthesizers, MTV, and pop producers, where punk already smelled like nostalgia. She decided to start over from scratch. No band, no ice blonde persona. It was a fragile, risky time. Debbie was once again walking the tightrope between art pop, film, and solitude. In 1986, she returned with her solo album, Rockbird. Light, playful, and carefree on the surface, but filled with quiet tenderness and fatigue underneath. The single French Kissin' in the USA became a hit in Britain, and its video introduced her new image. Less punk, more ironic, mature, and self-aware. Chris was once again by her side as co-writer, but by then, their relationship had softened into deep friendship rather than romance. By the late 80s, Debbie appeared more often on screen than on stage. In David Cronenberg's Videodrome, John Waters' Hairspray, and Forever Lulu, playing odd, rebellious women who reflected parts of herself, just without the microphone. In 1989, she released her third solo album, Deaf, Dumb, and Blonde, a punchy return to guitar-driven energy. It featured I Want That Man, written by Tom Bailey of Thompson Twins, which climbed the charts and was hailed by critics as Debbie's second youth. But she herself admitted that she was no longer chasing fame. By 1990, she had finally found balance. Some music, some acting, no crazy tours. She was living in New York again, at her own pace with no label deadlines, no commercial pressure, and most importantly, no need to prove anything to anyone. That peace of mind echoed throughout her work in the 90s. The exhaustion had been replaced by quiet, creative curiosity. She was now creating for herself, not for the world. In the 70s, that kind of mindset could have ended her career. But by the 90s, she had a name, respect, and freedom. Commercial success no longer mattered. In 1991, she released an experimental mini-album with the Jazz Passengers, where she explored a more theatrical cabaret sound. She became deeply involved in art projects, performed at benefit concerts, and collaborated with young photographers and artists. At the same time, she continued acting in independent films, such as Intimate Stranger, 1991, and Heavy, 1995, often choosing roles that were raw and real, far from the glamorous star image. In interviews from that time, she said simply, "I'm not playing characters anymore. I just want to be honest." By the mid-1990s, New York had fallen into a full-blown nostalgia for the 70s, and Debbie Harry felt it too. Maybe she was tired of resting, maybe new inspiration struck, maybe her finances were running low, or maybe it was all three. Whatever the reason, she decided to return to the stage, and not alone. Blondie reunited. It wasn't just a sentimental comeback, it was a retro act of reinvention. In 1999, after 17 years, they released No Exit. Debbie once again took full command. Her voice had grown deeper, warmer, with a smoky texture only time can create. The single Maria instantly rocketed to #1 in the UK, earning massive radio play around the world. Debbie didn't sound like a relic of the past, she sounded like a woman who knew exactly who she was. She toured again, but now with the poise of a veteran, someone who didn't hide her age but wore it with grace. The shows reflected that change. They were more intimate, more human, and the recording process became slower, more deliberate. In 2003, Blondie released The Curse of Blondie, a dark, experimental, almost industrial in sound. Commercially, it didn't take off. Fans wanted nostalgia, not experimentation. But critics praised Harry for still sounding sharp and fearless. Her lyrics had become more personal. Less flirtation, more reflection on time, fame, and mortality. Feeling that confidence again, Debbie returned to her solo work. In 2007, she released Necessary Evil, recorded with the jazz ensemble The Jazz Passengers. It was a playful electropop record, light, ironic, and free-spirited, showing that she could still reinvent herself. In a way, she became a punk monk, calmer, wiser, but still burning inside. From the early 2000s onward, Debbie fully re-anchored herself to Blondie. In 2011, the band released Panic of Girls, their first album of new material in nearly 8 years. They toured extensively, gave interviews, and rebuilt Blondie's live presence. Since then, the group has become a kind of eternal rover, releasing albums from time to time, touring constantly, collaborating with younger artists, and keeping their cult alive. In 2019, Harry published her autobiography, Face It, pulling back the curtain on her life. Not just the stories of fame, but the harder truths of aging, loneliness, and self-acceptance. Interestingly, she devoted much of the book to her appearance, admitting that it had been her weapon on stage. But most fans would agree, her real strength was never her beauty. It was the image of a woman who carved her own path, from secretary to icon, sacrificing comfort and even motherhood along the way. Today, Debbie Harry still walks onto stages around the world, proving one thing with every performance. Art doesn't age, it just transforms.